What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I'm Jeremy. If you're new here, welcome to the show. I am super stoked to have you. And if you haven't done it already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you are a regular here and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. That'll help me out so much more than you can imagine. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, and Kevin for all their support. And if you want to join those fine folks and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you can become a patron for as little as $3 a month. That's less than $1 an episode. And if you do that, you'll get some sweet, sweet perks for your support. And of course, if you think the show is worth sharing, then I would love it if you told some friends. So you've probably heard a ton of people online, on LinkedIn especially, places like that, talking about how there is no process. The process, it's like there's no spoon. There's no process in UX design. You do what you want. And for the most part, unfortunately, I think a lot of times that does tend to be very true. But I've got Rob Hamblen on today, and we're going to talk all about how there should be a process. And if you don't have a process, how you might be able to work with your team to make sure that you guys find a process that works for you, because I think that is very important. So Rob has nearly 3 decades of experience in digital product design. He's led teams and delivered innovative solutions to complex digital challenges for high-profile clients like Amex, Adidas, Bain & Company, and HSBC. As a former product design director at AJ&Smart and creative director of UX at IBM iX, he's adept in managing cross-functional teams and fostering digital transformation. Rob has advanced the design sprint methodology, condensing months of work into a few days and creating a stakeholder-friendly version while at AJ&Smart. His expertise in rapid prototyping, innovation strategy, and design thinking ensures that digital challenges are solved with empathy for users without compromising core business needs. So Rob, welcome to Beyond UX Design. I'm really excited to talk about this today. How's it going? How are you?
Hey, everybody. Yeah, Jeremy, thanks for having me. Yeah, nice to be here.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely.
I got to give it as well.
What an intro. Yeah. Yeah. No, thanks. My good buddy ChatGPT helped compile that from various data points from your LinkedIn profile. Before you start, I got to give a shout out. I got to give a shout out to my buddy Andrew Rice, former guest on the show, for introducing me to Rob. So Andrew, thanks for the introduction. I think this is going to be a super awesome episode today. So we're going to talk all about process. Obviously, you worked at AJ&Smart. I think most people, if you're not familiar with AJ&Smart, I'm sure you'll talk about them a little bit, but they're well known for a lot of their, frameworks, methodologies on, things like design sprints and lightning decision jams and all that stuff. But I'll let you talk a little bit about that. So Rob, why don't you tell us a little bit about you, and then we'll get into it, man.
Okay, cool. So, the 3 decades thing always kind of freaks me out because, that sounds like an epically long time, right? So, for me, it's kind of like one of those things where it's like, Anyway, so I started out as a traditional graphic designer, I guess you could say, and managed to get my foot in the door in an actual design agency back in the mid to late 90s. And it was at that point where I had done, I think, 4 years at art school, and I qualified to getting my foot in the door. And what it meant was that I actually made a career choice to actually not progress with a degree and actually ended up getting work experience. So that's kind of where some of my 3 decades comes from, because I guess you could say I had a kind of very early entry to the market. And cut a long story short, I was there for probably about 7 or 8 years. I then got headhunted to join a very small agency in Cambridge, UK, where we specialize in small screen and mobile. We were, I think, migrating from 1G to 2G, and a 3G was on the horizon with Hutchison Whampoa. And we were designing, mobile phone screens for, things like QVGA and QSIF Plus, and Nokia handsets like the Series 60 Nokias as well. So we managed to, it was very strange because it was like, you always hear of the dot-com boom era where, the joke is you sat at your desk, the company name changed twice, and then you get acquired by somebody. Well, that's exactly what happened. We got acquired by Qualcomm. So we immediately we were kind of like, salaries were doubled. We were flown with Virgin Upper. We were flown to San Diego, like almost like every 6 weeks. and we were heavily integrated into this, giant of an incorporation. And but we were able to kind of make a difference, and adapt our knowledge from small screen design into the Brew operating platform. And I think that kind of stems to some of my early days of kind of like transitioning from being a visual designer into being a UX designer. And, Jeremy, we're a similar age. So I think you'll also draw some parallels with, the job roles of information architecture, actually being a graphic designer and changing that job title into a visual designer. And, the job title has changed a lot over the years. And I think we're most commonly adept now to UX terminology and experience design. And you've got this whole kind of new realm of like what experience design is these days, and service design as well, right? So another long story short, I stayed at Qualcomm for about 5 years after the acquisition. And actually my family and our 4 kids and our dog, we felt actually we wanted to emigrate. So we ended up finding a location in the south of France. And I then became a freelance design consultant. And actually took many projects with me. This is now 2009. And one of my initiatives for 2010 was that I wanted to either build my own app and create my own app, or go heavily into the world of like 3D animation. And so if you're 2009, if you're good with numbers, the iPhone was launched in 2007, and I think the App Store was launched around 2008, 2009. So my decision to kind of want to be heavily involved in creating a digital product that other people could enjoy was kind of like, for me, more favorable than going the 3D route. But I was also at that time doing freelance design consultancy for Vodafone Group PLC in London, and also Deutsche Telekom in Bonn and Darmstadt in Germany. And really great exposure to how different studios were set up, working with amazing designers, obviously in Germany, also in the UK. And for me, it kind of, I was kind of reaching that kind of junction of like, do I want to start my own agency? And coincidentally, I'd met the 2 founders of AJ&Smart, John and Michael, and became really good friends with those guys, helped them out on a few projects, and they'd also offered me an opportunity to join them a couple of times. But every time I kind of turned them down because they're a very young agency. I've got a large family, and for me the balance wasn't quite right.
For sure.
And just coincidentally, that was the time when IBM had headhunted me also to help them establish a new studio in Dubai. And my wife was on the first call when I ended up having a chat with this, this recruiter. And she was like, well, like Dubai, like, that could be cool, right? And I was thinking, well, we've been in France now for 6 years, and we were very happy living there. And I was very surprised actually that she would be up for kind of moving again. But after a long conversation, some cheese from the local, cheese fromagerie and some nice wine, we had a discussion, and we was like, well, actually, yeah, maybe we should kind of give it a go. It'd be great for our kids to get some more cultural experiences. So I took the plunge to go to IBM, and actually at the same time, John and Michael had also offered me another chance to join them, and I turned them down to go to IBM. And I kind of felt like, for me at that junction, it was like, it felt like the fish that got away. I felt like, have I just said no too many times? And we then were 3 months into IBM. I was having regular calls with John and Michael, and to cut a long story short, they were trying to meet up with the design sprint book just over my shoulder. They had completely changed their agency business model to only running design sprints. And we had this conversation where I just said, look, Jake would want to listen to you, and you've changed your business model. He's going to want to hear how that's going. So go meet him, go and talk to him, and I'm pretty sure you'll get a lot of good stuff out of it. And that's when John and Michael just went, Rob, just ditch IBM and come and join us. So I said, look, I would, but I was kind of already committed to IBM for at least 2 years, and they said, look, if it takes 2 or 5 years, doesn't matter, just come and join us as soon as you're ready. So I felt very privileged, and I also felt actually at IBM I had a huge weight off my shoulders. I knew I already had an out, so it kind of made me a little bit more maverick, was being this creative director of UX for IBM. And That being said, like this is where the first part of the process story comes in. They kind of hinted at this Apple partnership and having this connection. And, when you're operating a design team, you have these kind of connections with Apple as well. So I was very much swayed with this kind of later marriage or partnership that they had back then. And, but equally, also the exposure to enterprise design thinking. And we were given very unique opportunities to run enterprise design thinking workshops for some amazing clients. And actually, two of those projects back then were one was for a diabetes app, and another one was for a pregnancy app. So we had this amazing kind of like exposure to global doctors, certainly in the world of diabetes, who were trying to help patients and people suffering from this awful disease. So process really for me then was kind of like, okay, this is really important because these doctors, like, we cannot waste their time. We have to be able to kind of show them like the benefits of why they're not doing surgery for a week and things like that. So jumping out of the 2 years, I left IBM. We launched two versions of both of those apps for that region, and actually they won local awards for design and innovation back then. So I felt like I'd done my job. That was great, and then moved the family slowly back to a very cold Berlin. Obviously, Dubai is extremely hot on most of the year.
Bet,
yeah. So we had some cultural adjustment, I guess you could say, and then literally immediately thrown into this, like, okay, right, we're off to California. We're doing a boot camp with Jake. We've got Uber and Lyft and Western Digital and all of these amazing clients that we're running sprints for. And Adidas were kind of like asking us to then go and run product sprints for them. It was a crazy kind of world where actually every week we were running design sprints for like amazing companies positioned all around the world. And I'm not going to say, like, it was like the first year and a half, it was ridiculously frantic, and but we were running on adrenaline. We were like this small Berlin agency that were being asked to go and run design sprints for Twitter in San Francisco.
It's amazing.
Like that's crazy, right? It's like we had to kind of like almost check ourselves before we were going into the building, because it's like, why are they talking? Why do they trust us to do this? And then we would leave completely, like, wow, we kind of like we held our ground, and we hopefully kind of like helped teach them a rapid innovation process, and able to get them to be disrupted as well. So it was really cool, like really cool times. And I stayed at AJ for about nearly 3 years. And I guess my calling was always there. And don't get me wrong, I loved like the culture of AJ&Smart, and I loved how we disrupted using design sprints. But I really missed the kind of the whole designing of like a whole experience, like we did at IBM, and actually
from start to finish.
Exactly, pressing the button and getting it on the App Store and things like that. So for me, it was a really easy decision to kind of go, right, do you know what? I'm going to start my own thing. I'm going to be more kind of comprehensive with the whole design thinking process and this rapid innovation framework of like the design sprint and everything else in between. And so Be The Leap was formed in January 2000, and actually my first client was Blinkist. And my second project was a bank in Mexico City. So I kind of solo went to Mexico and helped an agency run a sprint there.
Yeah.
And they then kind of asked me to kind of fill like a CDO role to help them actually build the app out and mentor their design team and actually help them kind of like knowledge up basically to do that. So for me, I kind of learned very early on in the early years of Be The Leap that actually, I'm very good at being able to kind of flex my offering and be accommodating with regards to the whole process of like how you would make a digital product experience grow. Now we're still very boutique and very small. There's 4 of us. And I'd like to think that we actually impact and dent the world in design and product and innovation, and help a lot of companies all over the world actually help solve problems. And just one of those examples was last year, actually the end of the previous year. I still keep thinking of like 2023 as this year, but we were design sprints and product workshop and leadership workshops for California-based companies. And also there was a Canadian company that asked us to go and run a sprint in Australia for 3 weeks. So
Oh, wow.
we're very fortunate to be, migrate wherever the teams need us, basically. And I also have to
That's
give
awesome.
an honorable mention to some of those projects that we've also helped evolve into products, we've also invested in as well. And Takes is actually one of those products, and it comes from San Francisco. The two co-founders at the time, we'd ran the sprint, we'd kind of proved the data worked, and we also really liked the idea of this sports and social media app getting some traction. So we then went into like an execution phase with that product, and we've now been helping them evolve that product for nearly 2 years. And we're significantly growing the user base. We've got a large landmark of the Super Bowl for February. I think it's February 11th or something like that for the latest Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just continuing to kind of grow that. And actually, I'm also co-founder of that app experience now as well. So that's Takes. So go and check it out if you're interested in sports and social media. And we still have a very long way to go. But I'm just loving the whole journey of and contributing to that whole cool experience of sports and social. So that's pretty much me.
Right on.
So hopefully that wasn't
awesome.
too long an intro for everybody.
No, it's fine. It's perfect. Well, it sets it up perfectly because everybody out there listening gets to hear now your experience, and you've had not only internal experience working in-house, you've had external agency experience. You worked for AJ&Smart, which I think is, a lot of people will know them as, the people who help with design sprints and the process there. So you've got a ton of experience dealing with process, and you've got a ton of experience understanding when the process can be bent, broken, changed when needed, and things like that. So we're going to talk all about that. So the first thing I want to talk about here is, this idea in the zeitgeist of social media mostly, right? UX people telling junior designers, forget about the process. There's no process, and I want to hear your take on that, and to tell me, you've obviously been in the trenches dealing with process for a very long time. What is your take on this notion that there is, quote unquote, there is no process?
Yeah, and I think designers are kind of really categorize designers. I think designers, like, they want to be creative, right? They want to be able to have this free will to kind of give their contribution in whatever sense that means. And certainly from myself and the designers that I've mentored and managed over the years, I felt like process was always something that felt like it compromised their creativity. And, I had early exposure to design thinking back in the early 2000s and loved it. And, you had to have a very accommodating product team to kind of give you the free will to kind of like bring design thinking components into how products were made. And I guess I had it with some early adoption at Qualcomm when I was managing the team there, but I guess I couldn't like fully flex kind of like what that meant. And to be completely true as well, like I was still learning, like, what does process actually mean? And back in those days, if you were to ask a designer about process, it would be like, like we gather requirements, we then go to wireframing, and we then go to like execution and UI design. These are the Photoshop days, and I think even when you were transforming into like Adobe Illustrator as well for like the vector-based UIs. But that would be as much of a process that you would get out of people. And if you were lucky enough to work with big corporations, you might have like UAT testing, user acceptance testing, or
2-inch thick requirements documents.
And then we were slowly creeping in. And actually at Qualcomm, we actually set up a usability lab so that we could actually bring users in. And for me, that was when I really felt like process had to include like user testing. And there's still a lot of companies out there that say they do it, but don't for everything. And that is that, the user testing component should be part of every designer's process. And, if you're a young designer, if you're a junior to midway designer and you're going into the world of either a corporation or a design team, it's your job equally to ask, like, what's their process? Because they will immediately probably disregard whatever process you have as you get hired. It's a natural thing, right? Because, if it's your first gig of years under your belt, people in design teams typically don't want to listen to the juniors because they are like, well, like, who are you? Like, you're like, we'll tell you how we do it, and then you fit into that. So what I find is that a lot of designers, young designers these days, are learning process through their either online courses or through universities or whatever. They immediately get thrown into a world where, you know, their process is compromised based on like the corporation that they're joining. And I've had many good conversations with Andrew Rice, a good mention here as well.
Yeah.
And we just feel like, you know, and don't get me wrong, there are companies that are heavily disciplined. And if you are lucky enough to kind of be nurtured into like their process and encouraged to kind of grow within their process, that's a really, you know, that's a really good thing. So I'm not saying that there are no processes ever in any corporation or design team or whatever, but sometimes there's just time is money, right? And when you're in an agency, you know, like normally it's about the priority of just getting, you know, pitch decks out there or completing like workflows and things like that. So, you know, it might not be that you get to fully flex your arm and your process. So yeah, I think that's probably the best way to summarize it. And that is that, you know, processes are important. And if you're new to design and you have had exposure to the process of how you know, discover, for example, and you research and capturing requirements in that way, and having these kind of conversations with stakeholders and customers, and, you know, customer interviews and onboarding, and, you know, behavioral aspects of how people, you know, work basically, then that's the first part, right? That's you understanding like your early requirements and your early parts of your process. And, you know, I'm not going to go heavily into design thinking, but I know that design thinking have at IBM, we had the loop that evolved, and that is the observe, reflect, and make. You know, that's basically the process that we adhere to. And going back to, you know, when I founded Leap, and every engagement, very subconsciously or not, followed a process. And that was, you know, this kind of discover, then it was basically the strategy and planning, then it was this human-centered aspect of, and then designing for them, and then user testing, things like that. And then you would have this kind of like, okay, we're now launch ready, how do we now grow this experience? And certainly in my field, that comes into like, you know, what happens after, you know, the minute the last sprint is designed, is for me is when the work really starts, because, you know, you're trying to understand like where, you know, where you can improve it, how you're doing version 2 of the product. And so, you know, we go into heavy focus group testings as well, so to try and capture as much data as possible. So a lot of the products that I tend to offer would be the Leap follow this structure. And, you know, like I kind of shock people sometimes. So when I'm going into, you know, like these C-suite workshops, and, you know, like, Rob, okay, like, you know, you've got all the answers, you tell us what it should be. And I'll be like, I literally throw it back to them and go, look, yeah, okay, I'm a designer and I have a good understanding of what I think your kind of users will want. That's just the start point. We obviously just want to then validate that by putting it in front of customers. And I always say to them, for anyone out there that gets resistance about user testing, this is the conversation that I have from this point onwards. And that is that, why wouldn't you want to know how your product is going to perform the minute you've pressed launch on the App Store? You know, like I want to have a sleepless night. I don't want to have to kind of like worry a week or 2 days or a night before the app's going to go live, knowing that like we have no idea how it's going to perform. But if you use a test regularly and put it into those iterative cycles, then you can pretty much with confidence explain to someone on C-suite, like, well, then we've covered for this. Like if there's a problem afterwards, like with adoption or marketing, you can just go, well, the people that we tested with, they want to use this. So it's like, you need to work out a better way of communicating it, like what the USP is to the people so that they know it exists. So that's kind of like, I mean, I'm generalizing, obviously having a little bit of fun in that statement as well, but we're basically just saying that actually our process means that we actually understand like how users are going to use it and adopt and then grow through it as well. That's a long answer to a question.
No, it's good. Yeah. It's funny. I was thinking of this when you were mentioning about like when you go to an interview and people ask what your process is. And then the minute you get on the job, they change whatever, you follow whatever process they have. And I always found that question to be so ridiculous. Like, does it matter what my process is? Like, I want to know what your process is. Like, I want to know if I want this job. Because as a junior designer, you know, like it's so funny. We talk about this idea of like there not being a process. And I think the reason why people think that is because, generally speaking, many teams are so dysfunctional that there is never a process, because there's one or two stakeholders with outsized influence that come in and kind of throw their weight around and keep people from doing certain things.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious from your perspective. I want to talk about this for a little bit. Like, I think design maturity is a topic all on its own, but when we talk about process, I'd love to get your thoughts here. When you've gone into, as a consultant, when you go into these internal meetings, or when you go into these meetings with these executives or maybe middle managers, because let's face it, a lot of times, a lot of this comes from middle managers, less from the executive sitting in the corner office who usually have no idea what their teams are actually doing.
Yeah.
But when you go into these meetings and you find that there is a dysfunctional process, I'm curious what those conversations look like, and how do you help to sort of guide those teams back towards, again, there isn't one single process, but a process that is better than the current process.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really good question. And I'm also a little bit lucky because, I'm a little bit lucky because normally when we're called into like a product kind of project, we only work with C-suite, and then we go top down. Okay. So what that means is that, and there's still a
stick.
There's still a little bit of resistance, right? So normally there's a sponsor who really already knows like how we work and how we're going to obviously deliver this disruptive process. So, quote unquote, they can make disruptive products. But what happens always is that the sprint, and I'll talk more specifically about the sprint for this scenario, and that is that there's a lot of people still scared of what the sprint does. And when you, as an external agency, come in and accelerate a product team that are in a large corporation or whatever you want to call it, enterprise environment, then people are naturally guarded, because obviously you work at a much more accelerated pace, which obviously isn't sustainable if you work there day on, day out, right? So, but what we're trying to show them is that the process can actually help them achieve really good results really quickly. It will ultimately help them save a ton of money, ton of dev time, ton of hiring people that they might not need, but also, more importantly, like proving that the business model works through this validation of this tangible concept, or this proof of concept, or whatever you want to call it. And so normally the process for us, like as they get kind of pulled through this kind of washing machine experience of like starting a sprint on a Monday and then finishing on a Tuesday, like they're literally on this kind of, we call it a roller coaster, because, seemingly a lot of the exercises don't really fit together. And really it's only for our kind of product team that we kind of understand like what we're getting from these people. But they come out of it on the Tuesday going like, whoa, like what was that? Like, and actually a friend of mine, he actually once quoted the sprint as like, when you go to a really good party, but you can't quite remember what happened. And it's like, it's a really funny, like, metaphor to kind of like, because you get pushed through so much, and then suddenly like Monday morning becomes a bit of a blur. But by the end of Tuesday, normally everybody is kind of like, wow, okay, I now get this. And then obviously my team are going to go, well, we're going to put our money where our mouths are. We're going to make this prototype in a day, which is seemingly like crazy. Like we've built ridiculously long prototypes in just one day. It doesn't always need to be, by the way, but just to kind of show the acceleration, like how we bring like a product vision to work to life. And then when you get the feedback and the user test data, they're like, I can't believe that this is just, we're on day 4 and you've already captured like these insights already. Like, from the first interview, we normally share it immediately on Basecamp afterwards. And like they're giving us feedback like real time. Normally while we're doing the next interview, we see like the comments come in. And actually I remember there was one sprint that we ran in particular, and it was a Silicon Valley company, really, really lovely client. They're still an ongoing client of ours. And one of their engineers, he got when we showed him the prototype. So this is on a Wednesday evening, just before the Thursday morning prototype. This is B2B testing environment as well. He got really emotional when he saw the prototype, and I'm thinking to myself, oh crap, he's got to make this. And like, he's kind of like, whoa, like, what am I going to do with this? And I kind of challenged him a bit more on it. I was like, you're seemingly like, quite emotionally connected with what you've just seen. Like, share with me like why that is. And he was like, Rob, he goes, I've waited 10 years for this. Like, why has it taken us this long? to kind of show a different direction and how we can move forward. And this is a guide for me. This is stuff we step and repeat bi-weekly, and it's like, for me, it's kind of like it's almost like the secret sauce, or like the fountain of youth. Is that like you want people to experience this because you just know how much it's going to accelerate and motivate and align people. So for me, like that's kind of where I get my jollies from this process, and how this process can really help teams of people work on a single vision to move forward. And when you've got the team aligned, that's when amazing things can happen. So when you're doing that with leadership teams, of course, you're going to get great exposure to these amazing conversations from all of these very technically capable people. So as a designer, I always say this as well. It's like, why wouldn't you want to be privy to these amazing conversations? Because I know for a fact, even now, it's going to make me a better designer when I'm privy to these conversations. And for example, back at AJ, we ran a sprint with HSBC, and it was like one of our first major banking sprints. And I was briefing my team, and I was like, guys, you guys need to knowledge up on open banking, because I don't want us to be the designers in the room. I want us to have conversations like we're bankers. And what happens is that we end up creating concepts or product experiences based on our crazy, knowledge immersion in like just a couple of weeks. And normally what happens is, and I actually use one of my kind of internal KPIs from a sprint, is that our concepts are chosen. And normally what happens is the client will go, how have you actually got into like our problem space when we've chosen your concepts? Like, you think we would know this? But that's how powerful the process of a design sprint is. It enables us to really dig in deep and come up with solutions. So for me, that's like where it kind of blows my mind. So to come back to your middle management question, I mean, you're going to get that, right? I've been a middle manager, so I know that you're typically either reporting to upper management, and you don't really have much kind of sway over, like the teams that you manage. But, what we found is that you can still make a difference. But when we come at it from a top down, it means that you've already got buy-in from the senior management team. So that's normally how the disruption kind of disperses through the company, because the senior management are going, right, well, we tried it, it works, now it's on you. And that's where like our training and things like that comes in, because then we can actually train the middle product tiers so that they can be more effective as well. And it's all about empowerment, right? So that's also one of our mantras of Be the Leap, and that is that we are an external product team, but we're almost like an extended arm. And I know that's not a new way to kind of pitch like an agency, but we do take a lot of pride in actually empowering those teams to kind of run these things themselves. So we also like to say that we don't want to be kind of hired long term, because that's also sometimes where we stagnate. But if the product and the project is really interesting to us, of course we'll have those conversations. But it's a really interesting kind of psychology behind how you balance, how you run a sprint, how you pitch it, and then how you empower these teams to then run it afterwards. But actually the best one, very quickly, the best one is when we have like design agencies who hire us to go in and help them knowledge up on design sprints, or they don't have those internal capabilities. And what I've often found is that the designers feel very like their guards are up. It's like, okay, like what's this process? I don't want to be compromised. But our theory is, it's like, we never do pitches now for work, because we would just run a design sprint. Because rather than pitching for an idea that is all based on assumptions, and of course it can be creative as well, but why wouldn't you want to just validate that business model with something real in the same space of time that it would normally take to put a pitch together? So that's also how we treat it. But what we often say is that the design sprint, you get everybody in the room who has the knowledge. You give everybody a Sharpie and a Post-it note. I've got some here on my desk somewhere, but like and a Sharpie and a Post-it note and a pad. You collect the ideas, you collect the assumptions. We do our job up front, so that we do this design thinking component up front. So we talk to customers, we talk to end users, we try and understand like where their pain points are. And then it's when you get the business team and their assumptions, that's when we're already immediately able to go, well, there's a pain point there. We've got an assumption of how we might solve for this. That's an opportunity there, mapping these opportunities with pain points and actual solutions. And that's how we kind of like make sure that our products are more aligned with the customers' expectations, which indirectly makes the business more successful. But yeah, so you've got this process, you sketch, you draw your concept. Obviously, you've got heat mapping and voting. So that gets people into a consensus and you make a decision to kind of align people. And then you go into this rapid prototyping phase, and then you use a test process already in the world. You're doing what you do in 4 days. That should be the main pillars or foundations to your actual process in itself. So listening, sketching, creating, and, embellishing, iterating, and then, customer feedback. So tell me if that's not a process within itself that should complement any designer. So.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So one of the things that I'm curious about, and this is something I think a lot of junior designers often face, especially when we're talking in terms of low maturity or some kind of process, or let's just say let's not focus on low maturity, because I feel like that's like a whole nother conversation. Let's just like we see the symptoms of that lackadaisical process of random features and no time to do anything, and everything is rushed and all that stuff. And often designers will come back and say, we have a better way to do this. We have these steps that we should be doing. And so one of the things that I find is that a lot of times junior designers or anybody, even in your case as a consultant, you're coming in and you are trying to change something, right? And there are people there that are usually very resistant to that change, mostly because they think what they've been doing is correct or right, or nothing wrong with the way they've been doing it. Yeah. And you're telling them now, that's wrong, or maybe you're not explicitly saying you're wrong, or you have a broken process, but you're implying I have a new way of doing it, and they a lot of times get very defensive. But I'm curious from your perspective, how does a team or a designer or somebody on a team approach that without stepping on someone's toes or offending people who are often higher and have power and control over maybe a junior individual contributor or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that it's sad, right? Because, people already assume that because you're already in the industry that you're hiring juniors in, and they just kind of like, I'm being very crude now, but make the tea and do all the kind of like the work that's kind of no one else wants to do. And I'd like to think that doesn't happen anymore. It certainly doesn't happen at my company. Perspectives, they haven't been tarnished with like, limitations or boundaries, or, and actually you can really, and I want to say this, but anyone who's a junior, I don't want you to get a big ego now and think you're the shit, because like you still have a lot to learn, but equally it's a balance, as with life, there's a balance, right? So, and this kind of question actually really resonates with me, because I often mentor like designers from all realms of like career ranking or whatever, and this comes up a lot, and and it is frustrating, because that these people have great ideas, and they do have a lot to give, and they're just not being listened, and sometimes there is no solution other than that you need to move on, right? Because and also sometimes I think that, and I don't want my team to listen to this advice, but sometimes when you leave, you go and get experiences that you wouldn't ever get somewhere else. And that's actually sad. And I think that's why I work so hard at retaining my team, because I want to build long-term relationships with the people that I work with, and as we obviously continue to grow, we'll pull more people in, but I don't want this high turnover of people, because you lose consistency, you lose learnings, and it's very hard. So normally there's a bit of a tactic, and that is that what I often say is that if you're a junior and you've got a really good idea on something, then there's no reason why you couldn't ask an expert to come in on like a lunch and learn, for example, and then you're immediately transferring the fact that it's not you doing it, but you're bringing exposure into thinking differently. Right. And I've actually done this for a couple of people within my network. I've gone in and run lunch and learns on design sprints, for example, is I actually help set them up to then kind of take it over. And there's a way in which you can kind of do like experiments or like case studies, and like you treat it almost like a small project, and empower them to go, look, this person has an idea. Like, is it really going to cost a lot if you were to just, if you've got a challenge that you need to solve, throw like 5 or 6 people at it for like a week, or actually 2 days, and then get the creative team to make the prototype and then user test it, and just give them a chance to show you how much you can advance, like a blue sky vision of something that's been holding, you've been reluctant to start because you just don't know how to start it. And in some cases, it's meant that that person's been able to kind of grow and kind of move into more like a facilitator kind of role, and actually then go and, kind of like get teams to be more motivated. But it just takes the leader to be able to kind of see that. And well, don't get me wrong, it's risk, right? If you're a big company or even a medium-sized company, but your design team is at like less than 10 people, if you're putting a product owner and a researcher and a designer and maybe a couple of other experts in, that's a lot of time. That's time that they're not working for your business. But what I often say is that, like, if you want the business to implode from an innovation perspective, then just carry on doing what you're doing and do nothing. But if you're willing to kind of take the risk and empower people that could become like an elite innovation team within a company to help you kind of think 5 years in front, then you should run these experiments. And I even say to our clients is that, you shouldn't be running sprints every week. We only did that because we were doing sprints for different companies every week. But if you've got a company and a product team, there's no reason why you couldn't allow like 1 or 2 sprints every year, just to kind of re-energize people. One of the other things I also say is that, you can pull people in from different departments, people that are maybe like at IBM, there were people on the bench, right? So pull in some of those people that are on the bench that can go into this extra kind of learning capacity to kind of help advance like some product ideas, things like that. So yeah, there's a few tactics that you can put in play, but I definitely think, the junior left of the room, you need to be humble about it. And, it's a way you're educating upwards and you're adding exposure upwards. And you, of course, have to do that very sensitively. Otherwise, you're just going to kind of ostracize yourself and, become this person. You're also as well, like, if you're underperforming and you're, and you're offering these things, they're going to want you to be good at your job first before you do these things. So you need to make sure that you're I hate to say it, but, achieving above and beyond. And you can show them that you can step out for a couple of days to run a workshop or something and pull the right people in.
I love it. Yeah, that's actually really good advice. I mean, this is something a few weeks back we talked with Dan Weiner about this idea of being able to do the tactical and the technical work first before you can start trying to influence at a strategic level. If you can't do the tactical stuff, the day-to-day work, focus on that. Get really good at your hard craft. Get really good at your craft and your hard skills before you try to go do these other things. So it's actually really good advice. One of the things we talked, we had a conversation not long ago, and we were talking about a bunch of stuff. And one of the things that you brought up was this idea that a lot of designers will try to just break the rules all the time, and there's this. It's really important to first understand the rules. Before you go and try to break the rules, because if you just go willy-nilly breaking the rules, you don't know what that outcome might be. So talk a little bit about that if you could. I'm curious from your perspective, how do designers kind of take that? How do they get to a place where they understand the rules enough to know when they should or shouldn't be bent or broken?
Yeah, good question. And maybe I also don't have all the answers for this, but there's a number of reasons or ways you can dissect that question into certain scenarios. And that is that, like if you're a junior and you've kind of shown that you can work through the company's process and you deliver good results and things like that, then I think you can know. It's about knowing where to cut the corners, right? So, and I think when you become an experienced designer, that's the difference between an experienced designer and a new designer, right? Is the experienced designer, they've heard pretty much everything before. When you're briefed on a project, if you're designing a logo or you're designing a letterhead or you're designing a website, chances are you kind of know what works because you've been around for a little bit. When you're new, to the project, you're likely to only be coming in at a certain level. Maybe you're only going to be contributing to, I mean, I remember when I was at Vodafone, there were like 26 designers working on the masthead of the website. And for myself, it was like, I can't even work out what some of these iterations are. They're so like almost like insignificant. But, you know, it's like, it might be that you only have exposure on certain things, or you might be doing typography, or you might be doing just the research part of it, or you might just be doing the, you know, the pre-wireframe kind of part of a project. So again, with an experienced designer, you're going to have a more of an end-to-end understanding of like how it all fits together. I remember actually when I worked at Deutsche Telekom, I was responsible for a project and I needed an icon, and I just did it myself, right? Because I'd always done it. I'd recreated this kind of 3D icon. It was in the style of like their other ones. I'd worked out the metaphor. I'd done it because I was an independent designer. I could do this stuff. So when I presented it to the product owner, he was like, yeah, that's great. He goes, I see you got the icon team on the icon already. That was fast. And I was like, what icon team? I was like, I did the icon. And he was like, no, you're responsible for the product. The icon team do the icon. So I had to then get an introduction, a very awkward introduction to the guy that took the brief for the icon. And he was really pissed because I'd done his job. And I was like, God, I'm really sorry. It's like, anyway, just take what I'd done as a kind of like a start point, and I'll let you go and do your stuff. So briefed him. They came back to me 2 weeks later with my icon. It was like, I mean, they tweaked it a little bit, but it was like my icon. I was like, really? And he was like, yeah, he goes, actually, it was a pretty good job. But like, but it was like, never,
but you got to follow the rules.
Yeah, exactly, right. You've got to follow the rules. So that's a really good example of me kind of being a bit maverick and doing stuff. But on that occasion, it worked out. But it's like, you know, you just have to be able to kind of assess who's who, understand like where your remit is, understand how you can help people without kind of like patronizing them or offending them, and then kind of slowly kind of like, you know, kind of get more exposure outside of like the brief that you've been given. And, you know, I guess if you're good and you're enthusiastic and you're humble and kind and you listen, like these are great traits. Why wouldn't people want you as an extra hand if you've done your job? And, you know, I think actually for me, this goes back to my very first agency, a company called Triad Design in the Midlands in Northampton. And I would just be like really hungry for the next project. As a junior, like in those very early days, there weren't enough Macs for me to actually work on one during the day. I had to do all my design work when the designers went home. And I then started kind of contributing concepts to these big pitches that were happening. And then there was a consistent pattern where my concepts would get selected to go, okay, that's actually pretty good. We'll put that in front of the client. And then the client started to choose my work, and I was like, okay guys, can I have my own machine during the day now? So the art director would get a brand new machine, I would get the one that's like the oldest, but hey, at least I could work during the day. But I guess the kind of reality is that, you know, just be enthusiastic, be keen, hold your hand up for things, be humble, take criticism when you get it. Like, don't have an ego. I will just not hire anybody with an ego, not, you know, this one and only person that makes decisions for everybody else. And that's also something that I also say at the beginning, and that is that when I go into a room with C-suite people, I just go, look, I am not the person that's going to answer all your questions, but I've got a good idea to get started, but then let's get the feedback and then they'll tell us what you need. So, and I think if you take that approach as a designer, you immediately remove yourself and your ego. You're more like a tool to get things done. You as a bit of an advantage to then start kind of, you know, making a difference outside of like your remit. So that would probably be my advice for that.
Yeah, I love that advice. Yeah, one of the things that's interesting, if you think about like art and art history and art, like people getting a BFA or something, they learn to copy the masters. You know, it's not just copying it for the sake of copying it; it's copying it to see what do the brush strokes look like, and how did they use the brush, and what techniques did they use? How much paint did they put on the brush? How did they like mix it together? You know, like all these various things, to learn how to copy a Picasso or a Rembrandt or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And if you apply that to UX design, it's similar, right? You're not just copying to copy. You're learning those processes over time, and then as you learn to copy the masters, then you can say, you know, like, oh, Da Vinci used this really cool technique, but I'm going to change it slightly and I'm going to modify it, or I'm going to use a different thing, or I'm going to, do
Yeah.
whatever it is. And you start to learn how to mold and fit that process to your own unique style, right? It's very
Yeah.
similar to art. You learn to copy first. And then once you figure that out, then you can move on and create your own kind of style and your own aesthetic. And I think as a UX designer, I don't see it as being all that different, like a junior designer coming in on day one who's like, I got my own process, get out of the way. What are you doing? Like you talked a little bit before about like knowing what works and what doesn't. I think it's that wisdom that you build up over time.
Yeah.
Wisdom is something you don't learn in school. You can't get wisdom, I don't think, from a book. It's learning and doing and trying and failing.
Yeah, exactly.
That helps
Failing.
you
I love
get
that.
that wisdom.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I that's the kind of stuff I always think about. I tell people about this, and it's the same way I always see like these junior designers, and they don't copy art, they don't copy apps.
Yeah.
When they first start out learning visual design, and I look at them like your icons are like 10 times bigger than like everything else on the screen. You've got these weird gradients in the background. Everything's hard to read. Well, I didn't want to copy. I'm like, copy because it works. Copy because it works. And I think it's the same when it comes to process, and you learn that process, and then over time you learn what you can do. And the interesting thing too, and you kind of called this out a little bit, but I want to highlight it, is you have to know what the outcome of changing something is, and that comes with that wisdom. So if you just say, I want to break the rule, I want to skip a step, I don't want to do a step, or I want to do a step twice for some reason, that you have to understand, like, what's the outcome? What's the consequence, of doing that? And will it affect me negatively, or is it going to affect us positively?
Yeah.
And it's kind of one of those things you have to know from doing so often what to expect before going and changing those rules, or anything really, is effective, And I think that's something a lot of people, I don't know, they don't want to be constrained, like you mentioned. And I just feel like, learn it first, and then then once you learn it, then change it.
So many things you just said then as well. I like my ideas are like pop, yeah, exactly. And like copying thing is really interesting. And I did a keynote last year, and someone asked a question. And I just said, look, if you are a junior designer and you don't have a portfolio and you're wanting to learn how to create something, then copying is a really good example. And someone put their hand up and was like, oh, but you're just saying like put Spotify in like a portfolio and say you did it. I said, no, you've not listened. I said, no, it's exactly what I'm saying not to do. But it's like, what I always say is that like, it's a great way to kind of understand exactly what you just said, like the size of typography on a button, or like the icon or something like that. It's a really great foundation to kind of establish what are like the industry expectations for certain apps. And if you're really smart, you won't just copy one app, you'll copy a load, and then you'll have like these templated kind of screens that you can use in Figma. And what we often say is that like if you are a new designer and you don't have anything in your portfolio, then this is where you apply your process, and you can start thinking, okay, well, take Spotify from now. Like we know that some of the UI on it is horrendously like claustrophobic, and some of it doesn't make sense. But as a designer or problem solver, why don't you try adding like a business component, like a way of monetizing or something like that, so that you add a new kind of business model to an existing app, and then you can design using their aesthetics. So you're kind of thinking about a problem that you might be able to solve for. Then you apply this whole design thinking process to, do you know what, I want to find out, I'm going to put Spotify in front of a couple of my friends. What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? Well, if I were to say that if you could edit like your song list, for example, but it would charge you like a subscription fee of like $1.99 a month, for example. What do you feel about something like that? And then you can put it in front of 2 or 3 friends. And if you start getting a consistent pattern of like people wouldn't be bothered about spending like $1.99 a month to have complete freedom. I'm making this up completely, by the way. But as in what you're doing, not the actual story. But like, then you can go, okay, well then how could that module kind of fit into their existing ecosystem? Where would the entry point be? Would it be on the tab bar at the bottom, like blah, 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 with a new icon for the tab bar? That's got to fit in with the other ones, so that you can start to kind of show the fact that you're designing something. But I would hire someone if the fit and their mental attitude was right, if they did something like that, because I'm thinking these guys are not just designing something, they're actually solving for business models, and they're trying to think about how, like strategy is going to enhance the product experience and things like that. And of course, yeah, you can follow a pretty basic, design system and, create your own visual look and feel that looks good. Like those things can be taught, but the acumen of solving problems, like not just in a design sense, like that's, I think, in you already. We can nurture that out of you. So that's kind of why I would look into hiring people like that. I always say as well, like for anyone listening to this podcast now, if you're studying design or UX, that alone is not enough these days to be hired. You have to start understanding the business side of like products and things like that. For those of you that have got a camera, I know that you also, Jeremy, have some books on your shelf. These are all product books for like how products have succeeded and the tactics they've used for growth and things like that. So for me, if you can also design screens and you're pretty good at wireframing and problem solving, but most importantly of all, you're good at solving problems, that's when I'm interested in hiring you. Okay. So, lots of really, really cool things. And Jeremy, like I could actually talk to you for probably about 4 days without having the food in between. I think like I also like, some of the things that you've also
I'll take it as a compliment.
Yeah, you should. Like some of the things that you were saying there, like were really spot on, and I think, I think there's a lot to be said for that as well. So
we could do a whole nother episode just on, that idea of like learning and copying. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Part 2.
Exactly.
So you touched a little bit on this idea of what you're looking for when you're hiring. I want to dive into that real quick. I do have some questions for you for all our listeners to get to know our guests a little bit better. I know we've had you for a little bit. Do you have a hard stop, or can you keep talking for a little bit?
No, I'm good for like another 24 minutes. And actually, we've had some clients in today. We were running a workshop, so I've promised them that we're going to take them for dinner tonight. So yeah, that's
okay. Well, I got one more question for you, and then we're going to hop into these little 5 quick questions.
Okay.
But I want to talk to you real quick. You started talking a little bit about what you look for in your hiring. And I'd love to give some advice to any of the junior designers out there listening that are looking for work right now. And, you mentioned a little bit about hiring. I'm curious, when you're looking through something like a case study or a portfolio, what are you looking for to show that someone knows that business strategy or they're solving business problems? Is there something you're looking for when you're looking at a case study that just jumps out and you says, I know what I'm doing?
Yeah, 100%, because depending on the depth of that case study will be how you get an indication of how they're going to solve for that problem, okay? So to take you back, I was hiring my first proper designer for Be The Leap, and I actually created a questionnaire for them, for whoever was applying for the job to qualify. And I gave myself like an honest kind of like goal, and that is that if anyone answered a particular question correctly or in the way that I wanted it, I would give them an interview. And bearing in mind, Be The Leap was probably 16 months old. I'd taken a bit of a break for a couple of months to kind of step back and rethink what I wanted the company to be. And so I thought, right, okay, I want to hire someone, but I want this to be a certain kind of way in which they think. And I was thinking to myself, like, I'll probably get like 10 maybe candidates through. I'd put a post out on LinkedIn. I'd put a post out on Instagram. And I had something like 50 something responses. And I was like, whoa. I was like, okay, that's way more than I was kind of imagining. And Hannah, who is actually now that person who filled that gap, she is obviously still working with us. And so she was the first one to respond. She was the first one to organize like when I could talk to her. And she was very, very structured and very, very disciplined in how she kind of managed me in that process. And I kind of really appreciated that, actually. And it's weird, when I interviewed her, that she was the first interview, I knew that I would be hiring her because she just kind of ticked all of the right boxes. And for me, it was like, okay, but there's still like now at least 24 other people that got that question right. I wanted to talk to them as well. So I kind of went through that process and did that. And I'm really glad that I did. So I would say, with regards to like case studies, for me, if I'm hiring a designer, I know anybody can do that. My team do that in like a couple of minutes when we're doing sprints. Okay, so that for me isn't impressive. What I would like to see, and this could also be quite interesting for those of you listening, if you're lucky enough that you've already had work and you've got some pieces in your portfolio where it actually is a live or paid piece of work, I would also like to see the concept work that didn't get through to the final kind of the final version. And what I can then also understand from that is I can understand, okay, your creative offering. Like, so maybe some of the early concepts for me is like, because we all know that the minute the client gets in the room, they are like you've seen all the memes on Instagram. They're like your worst enemy. It's like, yeah, we love that, but take it out. I love that font, but make it smaller. I can't read it. I love that, but change that picture of that person. So, your original concept, which probably looked amazing, has been completely kind of like remastered into this very bland vanilla kind of experience. So seeing the two side by side would be very, very cool, because then you get to kind of like tell the story of like what happened. And I think that also comes into like the kind of portfolio exercise, as well as like how you communicate, whether you are able to eloquently understand your process and why certain decisions were made. What questions did you ask along the way? Where did you get friction, or where did you have challenge from like the team that you were working with? What could you have done better? Where could you learn? Like, these are going to be some of the questions that I would ask. Like, so I don't want to just see the glossy thing at the end. I want to see the real grit behind why decisions were made. And then obviously how you respond, and how kind of like, so for example, let me give you a good example of this. Would be like, so say you've designed a website and you've maybe, you've worked to a style guide and colors, maybe the call to actions, maybe repositioned, and maybe it's like a better customer experience. If I ask you like why you made those decisions, and your answer is something along the lines of, well, the brand is not so great, so I added in this other funky color because I felt like, people would see it a bit more. It was quite complementary to a logo that you now don't see on that screen, and blah, blah, blah. Like, you're just not going to get why you've been kind of given this privilege to kind of create and design things. Whereas if you turn around to me and go, well, yeah, my job was to kind of look at, the landing page, and we understood that basically the value propositions and the USPs weren't really communicating in the right way. And, we were losing, foot traffic very early on because they just didn't get it. Or, like if you've got a cart or something and, basically it was hidden below the fold and people weren't able to kind of see it, we were losing customers because we just couldn't convert them quicker. That's why we made these changes. And we did change the color because we felt like actually it didn't stand out enough as a call to action. So we wanted to kind of highlight a little bit more like that. I just, again, kind of spitball that. But if that's the kind of conversation you give me, like, I'm interested in you because you're getting the business challenge and why you as a designer are converting that into like a visual metaphor to kind of make the business more successful. So in essence, that's pretty much it.
Yeah. No, I love that. Yeah, and that all ties back a lot to, we talk about like storytelling and all that stuff in UX design, and that's, it's not once upon a time there was a button and, blah, blah, blah. It's the story is why you're doing these things, and, why are you creating these things? Why did you do a persona? I can't tell you how many times I've seen case studies with just personas. For what reason? Why? You never even reference them again in the latter part of the case study. So what was the point? That kind of stuff. I love that you're calling that out. And designers out there got to have a why. You don't just do stuff to do stuff. We're not artists. We are designers. So I love that. All right. So Rob, I know you got to get running. You got to get some clients. You got to go schmooze with. So I got some questions I want to ask, but before we do that, any closing thoughts? Anything else we didn't get a chance to cover that you think it's important for some of these junior designers, career shifters out there to know about process?
Yeah, I mean, we could even have another conversation on AI and what does that mean, right? Because
we didn't even touch on that.
Yeah, and I think to be brutally honest, and I think this goes back to my statement earlier, and that is, it's not enough to just be a designer, because I think obviously, the world has had a huge disruption in the last, 7 or 8 months with ChatGPT and all the other AI kind of offerings that have come off the back of it, first introduced. And I was really fortunate and old old. I know that you're thinking of it now as well. Because, when I first started in my first agency, not everybody had a Mac as a workstation. People were still marking up with the traditional markers and things like that. And when I went into that agency setting, I was like, whoa, like that's not what I signed up for. Like I wanted to use a Mac at university. I was using the Mac to do everything. And people were challenging me on like, well, no, that's only for typesetting and typography. Like, why would you create a magazine cover using the whole Mac itself? And like, guys, like this is the future. So for me, it was kind of like one of those things where it's like, well, yeah, actually it's as much of a disruptor, but it's kind of how you use that tool. And like when the computer or the Mac first came out, people were like, oh, it's going to take away our jobs, it's going to do this. And it's like, yeah, probably will to a degree. But I think if you're of the right frame set, you can use it as a tool to empower you to be a better designer or a better human or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I think you can use AI in a way to kind of, speed up your process. I guess that comes into kind of like, if you can use AI to help you write a bit of copy, but then you rewrite it in your kind of tonality, like then that's a great way. Don't just regurge what it spits out and hope you can kind of get away with that. But if you want it to kind of create like an image or something, then that's great. And so I would say, with the AI kind of elephant in the global room of being a designer, I think you should be aware of it. You should be concerned. But I still think it will need designers to oversee and make decisions to make sure that it's always making the right choices for us. But and that's also why I've strongly kind of pivoted our business model into working with people, so that we are always doing like workshops and meeting the people that have the challenges, rather than just like being a website designer. I would worry for my business if that's all we did. But if we are working with product teams and you're able to strategize against business models so that the outcome is a design of a website that's going to help their business, then I think ultimately that will bridge that kind of AI uncertainty to a degree. But I mean, I've already noticed that like people are not using copywriters as much. I mean, it was always a luxury position, right? And only when we worked in huge corporations that we would pull copywriters in, and they would be kind of like pulled in at the last minute. It's like, we've done the whole site map, we've done all the flows, we've done all the customer journeys. Can you just copy that and copyright it? And they'd be like, guys, like I like, you pulled me in for 2 hours, like what the fuck? But it was like it would be a case of like, okay, give me a week and I can kind of give you some tonality kind of like offerings and localization, and that's kind of where you really appreciate what a copywriter can do. And I think people are kind of using AI like that. Well, we'll just get AI to do it. It's like, but AI has no concept of like localization and things like that. So that's where I would say AI is kind of like the elephant in the room. But don't be scared of it, but also don't just assume that you're going to be all right.
Embrace it. I think it's one of those things where I think you just made a great point that AI has zero context. Yeah. It's literally just taking whatever you've typed in and giving you something back.
Yeah.
So sometimes that's good, sometimes it's bad. For now. Yeah, for now. That's true. And when I think about UX design especially, like there's so much going on, there's so many variables. In order for AI to truly replace a human, it's got to do all of that upfront discovery and the research and have the conversations and get all the context to give anybody anything worthwhile. Yeah. So, if it's not the AI doing it, it's someone else having to gather that context. So I feel like that's kind of one of those things, like the visual design piece. I hate to say it, but maybe at some point next 5 years, it'll just spit out a beautiful UI, perfectly designed with words that are actually legible. Yeah. Yeah. But what it won't be able to do is determine what right is. Yeah. It won't be able to tell you what good looks like, so you have to know that. So anyway, that's a really great point. All right, Rob. So I've got some questions I like to ask all of my guests to get. I know we could keep talking. I know you got to get out of here. You got to go have some drinks with clients. So you got to close that deal, baby. First up, what is your?
Sorry.
It's celebrating. We're celebrating. Right. Yeah, no, it's all good. What is your favorite non-design book?
A non-design book. It actually has to be Sprint, because I've kind of based my business model on it. So yeah,
there
Sprint.
You go.
Yeah.
All right. I like it. Yeah, that's technically not a design book. I think you're right. All right. What is your favorite non-design podcast?
It was called Wireless Nights, and it was hosted by a guy called Jarvis Cocker. And actually, when I first moved to Berlin, he actually came to Berlin, and he's got such a he's an old like 90s pop star or whatever, and he's got a very unique voice. But somehow, when I was listening to this episode about Berlin, I genuinely felt like I was on this journey or this story with him. So yeah, really, really cool. Yeah, that would be one of my most memorable ones. Yeah.
You said is he no longer doing them?
I to be honest, I haven't listened to it for a little while, but he had he's done a lot of episodes. But I'll be honest, I actually don't really listen to podcasts that much. I tend to do audiobooks because
right on. Okay.
I still listen to some, and I still listen to John from AJ&Smart. Like he's got this CEO one now that he does. So I'll give John a little plug and just say that that's also quite interesting because it's like not design, but it's more about like running an agency and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, actually, I've been meaning to ask you this since before, but AJ and Smart.
Yeah.
So John is the J. Is there an A, or is his first name actually an A and the middle name J?
So there was an A. I can't remember whether it was, I think it was an Andrew. But originally, when they started the business, he was a developer, and they would the three of them would that's why they ended up.
Oh, so there was a Smart as well.
Yeah, and
so
Smart,
there was
Michael Smart. Yeah, so and it just right, and actually, I'm not sure if Michael is actually still part of the business. I know that he went to like a silent partner for a while because he relocated to Australia. But yeah, that's where the Smart came from. So it was AJ and Smart.
All right. That's hilarious.
You should get John on because he also tells a very funny story of like how he branded.
I tell you what, if you can get John on the show, I'll send you, I don't know, a gift basket and some fruit or something. I'll send you a virtual high five. Okay, awesome. We'll talk after. All right, so you've traveled around quite a bit. What is your favorite meal? You've probably had quite a few delicious meals. This could be anything you've cooked, you've eaten somewhere. Your grandma used to cook.
Yeah. Okay,
the best thing you've ever eaten.
Okay, so I love seafood. If we ever go on holiday, I will just literally survive on seafood. But my go-to at the moment is, and this comes from the summer when we were barbecuing all the time. I was barbecuing like boneless chicken thighs and making a burger out of them. So actually a burger. I love making my own chili mayonnaise, loading these burgers up, and you've got to have a cold beer with it. So yeah, chicken burger.
Oh yeah, of course.
Brioche bun and a beer.
Ooh. I love a good grilled chicken thigh. I'm with you. Everybody loves chicken breasts, and I'm like, well, how could you like chicken breasts? They're so dry, and they're just
I know, right?
Chicken thighs. That's where it's at.
There's more flavor in the thigh. Yeah, exactly.
All right. What is your favorite vacation spot?
Ooh, okay.
Somewhere with seafood, I assume.
Yeah, and actually, do you know what? My wife and I were only talking about this the other day because we were in Miami last year. We loved Miami. And then we were like, well, actually, because I brought her to Sydney when I went to Sydney, we were like, Miami or Sydney? It's like, which one would you choose? So I think it has to be Sydney because for me, it took me a long time to get to Australia. For me, I went for the first time 2 years ago when we had this project. I just wish that I had gone there earlier on. So for me, Australia, Sydney. And actually, I went and saw Michael Smart in Perth on the way back as well. So Australia for me.
I've never been to Australia.
Make it happen. Like it's a really, really lovely destination.
I need to. I know. I love it. One of these days,
day.
I will. At some point, I will definitely go. All right. Last question. What is your favorite design tool that is not Figma?
Ooh, a design tool that is not Figma. I would probably say, can I say Basecamp? Because it's kind of like...
Sure, yeah. It's kind of, it facilitates design.
I'll tell you why, and that is because we end up doing a lot of report writing and updates and things like that. And I think if I wasn't using Basecamp, I would pull my hair out. So for me, and the reason I'm going to put it, I'm probably, a lot of designers have probably like literally just pulled the earphones out of the like podcast and not listening. And sorry, like if you're still here, right? And let me explain, let me redeem myself. And that is that for me, as I'm creating these reports, I used to love typography as a graphic designer. And I think for me, there's no other tool that handles typography so empathetically than Basecamp.
Okay,
so for me, like
right.
you, and it's just really easy. It's
okay.
really intuitive. It's just, and these reports just look so lovely when you've done them. So for me, yeah, Basecamp.
Well, see, you
exactly. I was also going to say,
ahead.
as a designer these days, like I'm lucky if I get into Figma, because when I'm in Figma, my team are like, fuck, like Rob's in Figma and I'm going to do this,
get out of here,
move this here, change this, like, and then it's like, okay, and then I leave, because like the minute, I always say this thing is that the longer I stay in Figma, the more my business suffers, because of course I love it and I'm a designer, but my business doesn't run when I'm in Figma. So for me, it's a luxury.
I love it. Yeah, well, I love how you've taken something like Basecamp, project management tool, and found a way to design the reports using the typography settings. I love that. That's great. I thought you were going to say something like Miro or FigJam for a minute, but you threw me a curveball there.
Yeah, I mean, I can also remember Miro when it was real-time board, and there's a funny. If we've got time, there's a funny story about how we started using that. But for me, Miro is a good tool. FigJam we use, but I'm just not quite sold on its functionality just yet. I still think it has some issues. But so this is and actually for those of you that do know AJ&Smart, this is an AJ&Smart story. We were also doing a lot of remote design sprints. I started in early 2017, and we were experimenting with every possible tool, like Google Slides or whatever you want to call it. It's awful. And trying to work out these kind of tools that would enable these people to kind of like be immersed into this kind of like remote workshop. And I was working with Amma, who is a researcher, ex-engineer, and a really amazing guy. Actually, Amma, you should probably get on the show. He's an amazing guy. And we were obviously doing note taking. We'd just come from California. We'd ran a sprint with Google, and we captured the wall of justice, which is like basically like the post-it wall behind me, but times that by about 10. And like all these sticky post-it notes were on the glass wall, and we were trying to capture like the post-it notes with cameras. And obviously, as cameras were getting better, you were getting more increased megapixels, but we still couldn't like capture all of the detail. And when we got feedback from Google, they were like, "Yeah, do you know what? Love the sprint, but like the quality of like your capturing the feedback wall sucks, because it's like, you can only go so far." And obviously we were trying to do things really fast. We were doing updates from the plane, like Basecamp updates, and pulling them all together. So like we didn't have time to piece like 8 photos together to make a big montage and all that kind of stuff. And it was a bit like the Henry Ford thing, is like, the faster horses. Like the answer was not a bigger camera with more megapixels. It was like, you need to just find a better solution. So I put Amma onto it, and we were running a sprint the following week and capturing the data on the wall of justice. And before the interview day, he goes like, "I found a product. We could use real-time board." And I was like, "Okay, well then that's cool. Let's give it a go." But I was very hard on Amma, and I was like, "We have a zero tolerance on like, if it breaks, like we are not using it, because we're capturing data live, and like we don't want to have to go back and listen to another interview again." So I'd said to him, it's like, okay, we sat side by side, and we had this big TV screen in the sprint room at AJ, and we had this user on the TV screen, and we had this blank wall with the wall of justice kind of mapped out. And I was frantically writing, look, I do have photos here, like I was frantically writing like green and yellow and orange and like all these other kind of post-it notes to kind of like capture the feedback. So as they were talking, I was coordinating the interview, but also writing the feedback. And Anna was using real-time board to digitally capture like the feedback on these post-it
kind
notes.
of test it.
Exactly. And and I, as I'm interviewing, I'm looking at it and going, like typing away, like really efficiently, like really smug, and I'm writing with a Sharpie. My hand is getting tired, and we'd ended the interview. and looked at him, and he kind of looked back and went, yeah. And I literally just picked up all my post-it notes and just threw them in the bin. I went, okay, right. Real-time board is now what we use to capture that data.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, it was a really nice experience. And kudos to Amma, because like he was the one that kind of like found it, he tested it, and he knew that I had a very kind of zero tolerance on things not working. So yeah, kudos to him for using that. And now obviously we use Miro all the time. So yeah, it wouldn't be my tool of choice, but definitely it's up there for sure.
Yeah, I love Miro. I do a lot of service design, and so mapping and service blueprints, and just I use Miro for like everything. That was like my tool of choice back when I was doing service design. So cool. All right, Rob. Well, this was a fantastic conversation. I feel like we sort of cut it short. I could keep talking for a long time here, but I know you got stuff to do. Before we get out of here, why don't you tell everybody, give yourself a plug, and let everybody know where they can find you and all the stuff you've been working on. And we'll throw it in the show notes too.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I have done obviously a number of podcasts before, but I think if you go to my LinkedIn profile, Rob Hamblen, you can see links to posts. There's also, if you're interested in my early career, there's a Medium article which explains more about like how I started and how I ended up. And you can find me on social media. We're on Be The Leap on Instagram, which is Be The Leap. And also my name is Rob Hamblen on Instagram as well. So yeah, come and join me. If you have questions, I normally respond on Instagram as well. So if you do have questions, then I will answer them for you. So yeah, happy to connect with you guys. Thank you, Jeremy.
All right, Rob. Well, thank you so much for you for coming on. I really appreciate it. This was fantastic.
I wanted to say, like, you are an amazing host. It's been very easy to talk to you, and thank you very much for having me. So I really appreciate it.
Right on. Oh, I appreciate that, man.